To order. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2017, and this is a study session of the Prescott Council. Let's do roll call.
Mayor Mangarelli?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr?
Here.
Councilman Blair?
Yes.
Councilman Good?
Here.
Councilman Lamerson?
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl?
Here.
Councilman Sischka?
Here.
All are present. Mayor Pro Tem is on the phone.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for being here today. We have a presentation on the airport master plan, so we look forward to hearing about that. Thank you, Jesse, for being here. And then we will have opportunity for public comment afterwards. So, Maureen, you have those cards out?
Yes, I do.
So there's these speaker cards back there. You could fill one of these out and get it to the city clerk. We'll do public comment after the presentation. So, Jesse?
Good morning. My name is Jessie Baker, Assistant Airport Manager. 2 months ago, we gave a presentation over the alternatives for the airport master plan. We also had an open house also in October, which was open to the public over at Embry-Riddle University. This is kind of to get the new council members a little bit up to speed on this lengthy and very detailed airport master plan process, but also talk about specific alternatives. Now, these alternatives have been reviewed by airport staff, our city manager, Michael Lamar, and the previous Mayor Oberg. We sat down, went through all of these alternatives, and to give recommendations to the current city council. So we would like your feedback. Without further ado, I will introduce Doug Sander. He's Vice President with Delta Airport Consultants.
Thank you, Jesse. Good morning, everyone. As Jesse said 2 months ago, I gave a similar presentation. So for those that were here before, there will be some repeat. But then we'll get into some new items, specifically the preferred alternative. So here's just the agenda introduction, why now, the master plan process, the alternatives for the primary runway, the preferred alternative for the overall development, and then the next steps going forward after this. So master plan is a comprehensive study that looks at development of the airport over a 20-year period in several increments. Looks at environmental issues, looks at forecasts for based aircraft, as well as operations of aircraft, as well as air carrier employments. Looks at specific goals for the airport, as well as there are certain goals that the FAA requires. So we looks at a holistic approach for the FAA and the owner. And then at the end, develop a realistic plan, both development plan as well as a financial plan for the airport to implement all these alternatives. So why now? In 2012, the FAA developed or published a new guideline for design standards. So a lot has changed from when the airport was originally built and has been developed upon. So for the last 5 years, new standards have been out there that the FAA requires airports to meet. Updated completed projects since the last master plan, which was completed in 2010. Several projects have been completed, so this is going to update to show those completed projects. And then the big one is changes in industry. Airline consolidation, pilot shortages, fuel costs, how airlines do their business, market share versus revenue generation. Another big one is social media connectivity. A lot of people do Facebook, they do Twitter, Instagram, so that personal connection is not always there, actually face-to-face. That has changed the dynamics in aviation as well. So all these have come together for the FAA to indicate why we need to do master plan at this time. Master plan process and status. The orange areas have been completed. The green are underway. We're at the tail end of the alternatives development and evaluation. That is today. Where we're hoping to move on to the financial feasibility, which we have started with based on recommendations previously from staff. So we're getting very, very close to the end, and the end result will be the airport layout plan, which you see there. That is the roadmap for the airport to develop over the next 20 years. So we're going to look at the 3 alternatives that were studied for the primary runway 3 right, 2, 1 left. So alternate 1 looked at extending the runway 1,481 feet to the north and leaving everything else the same. This would result in a total runway length of 9,100 feet. That runway length was determined based on the existing aircraft that utilize, the existing design aircraft that utilizes the airport today. So this is what it looks like. You can see the extension to the north. On the south, we don't touch anything, except in order to meet standards, a portion of Clubhouse Road will have to be relocated to get around a portion of what is called the runway object-free area. It's a surface the FAA says needs to be clear. Currently, Clubhouse Road is inside that. So that road would have to be relocated in order to meet those standards. So that was alternate 1. Alternate 2 also extends the runway to the north, but this removes what is called a displaced threshold on the south end. A displaced threshold is a portion of runway that can only be used for takeoff, not for landing. So while you have 7,619 feet of runway, for landing, it's actually almost 400 feet shorter for 3 right. So what it would look like physically is a little longer extension to the north, some removal of pavement on the south, and a shifting of the runway, which means that object-free area will be shifted back on airport property and Clubhouse Road will not have to be relocated. So that was alternate 2. Alternate 3 is a very long shift to the north and get rid of the displaced threshold plus some additional runway length. What this does is it shifts another surface called the runway protection zone completely on airport property, something the FAA recommends highly. So what this does, it brings that runway protection zone completely on airport property, but this one also does require a relocation of Clubhouse Road in order to meet that standard. So those are the 3 alternatives we look at. From that meeting that Jesse talked about, we sat down and we came up with a preferred alternative. So all you see in green is either new or rehabilitated pavement that was proposed as part of this master plan. I'm going to go into a little more detail in each of the primary runways and taxiways and aprons that we looked at. So going forward, looking at the runway. So the preferred alternative for the runway extension for 3 right, 2 1 left was alternate 2, which shifted the runway to the north, removed the displaced threshold, but did not require the relocation of Clubhouse Road. This meets 99% of the FAA standards. The only one it doesn't meet is the RPZ, but what this does do, it actually brings the RPZ completely on city property as well as airport property. Whereas alternate 1, part of the RPZ was not on city controlled property. So this gets just about everything you need. For 3 left, 2 1 right, which is the parallel runway, this is a complete shift to the north of the runway. This also has a displaced threshold on the south end. This is an 800-foot displaced threshold, which can only be used for landing, not for takeoff, which severely impacts the usability of the runway. So the plan is to extend this runway for a total length of 6,200 feet, remove the displaced threshold on the south end, and what this alternate does, 100% in standard, meets FAA standards as far as RPZ, safety areas, and runway length. For the cross-run runway, runway 1230, very little here. It's very hard to see, but up at on the 12 end, which is the east end, actually all we're doing here is we're going to shorten the runway by 150 feet. This runway also has a displaced threshold, which again is only used for takeoff, not for landing. What this does is this will allow the airport to meet full safety area compliance without a displaced threshold. And again, it's a 150-foot reduction in length, which, based on conversations with airport and tenants, will not impact the airport significantly. So very little there on that one. So we had 2 major standards projects as well that we looked at alternatives for. Taxiways Echo, Taxiways Foxtrot. These are the parallel taxiways to your cross-run runway 1230. So relocate Taxiway Echo. Right now, the purple is showing what the proposal is. This taxiway varies from 325 feet down to 200 feet separation from the runway. The standard is 240 feet. So in some areas it exceeds it, some areas it's too close. So in order to meet standard, it needs to be 240. So what we're proposing is 240 feet the entire length, so it'll meet your standard where you don't now. And actually at the east end, where we're right now at 325, by relocating into 240, it's actually going to give you a larger apron area. So it's quite a lot of benefit with that project. Relocate Taxiway Foxtrot. I apologize for the fonts. They did not come through, so there's a few issues with the fonts on the presentation. Taxiway Foxtrot is on the north side of runway 1230. This also ranges from 325 feet to 200 feet. On the east end, it's 325. We recommend bringing that into 240 as well. More apron, as well as meeting standards. On the east end, where it's adjacent to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and some adjacent property, the recommendation is to submit to the FAA a request for a modification of design standard. It's just paperwork that gets submitted. If we were to relocate the entire taxiway to 240 feet to meet standard, it would impact Embry-Riddle's apron, which would require some additional apron space to be constructed to displace, that would take care of the displaced parking they have. It would also require the purchase and demolition of several buildings in the industrial park. It was decided that let's ask the FAA to get a modification design standard due to the cost and impacts of those two parts of the project. So what you see here is meeting standard for approximately half the taxiway, the other half modification design standard is sort of like a waiver, trying to get a waiver from the FAA. So that's the recommendation. That's where we're going to start for this taxiway. General aviation development. General aviation development is all your small single-engine aircraft, your business jets. What we show here is development of most of the undeveloped space, as well as some redevelopment of existing spaces. This layout provides great flexibility for both small hangars, large hangars, apron areas, and other development options. So what we show here is not exactly what's going to be built. This just shows you the options in these areas, what can be built. And most of this work here would be undertaken by private organizations. A lot of these, especially hangars, are not FAA eligible. So, next steps. Submit the preferred alternative to the FAA for review. Get their buy-on, because that preferred alternative gets put on the ALP, which the FAA is required to approve. They don't require these alternatives, they approve the entire ALP document. So continue work on financial and feasibility evaluation chapter, which is cost estimates. So what are these projects going to cost and how are they going to be funded? So that's what we're currently working on right now. And then finally, finish drafting the ALP layout, which right here is a sample of another airport's airport layout sheet. This is a single runway airport, so you can see how busy that is. With 3 runways at Prescott, there'll be quite a bit more. And overall, the ALP document for Prescott might be 25 plan sheets in total. So we are continuing to work on that. Looking at the schedule, as you can see, we've come a very long way. We're December of 2017. First quarter of 2018, the plan is to submit everything to the FAA for their approval. Based on previous experience, even after FAA submittal, it could be 6 months till they approve it. It's a big document they've got to go through, and they need a lot of time to review that. So I'm hoping for less, but it could be 6 months till complete approval of the document. So that's where we are right now, and Jesse and I will take questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments from the council? There you go, Councilman Shishka.
I'd just like to ask a question about the taxiway that you're proposing to get a waiver from the FAA. Why are we working so hard on the other side to make the taxiway 240 feet in all areas, where on the other side, I know that we've got, things that we're running into, but kind of give me an equivalency here.
Okay. The south side, Taxiway Echo, which is going to be fully standard, can all be done on existing airport property without impacting any other development. So the FAA would say that's a no-brainer. There's no practicable reason not to do it. While on the north side, the impact Embry-Riddle is going to displace several of their aircraft positions. It would require an apron expansion either somewhere in their area or somewhere else in the airfield, which adds to the expense of the project. And then purchasing property and demolishing 2 industrial buildings for 40 extra feet of pavement, they
Right.
might say, again, say that's not practical, that's not a good use of dollars. We're at 200 feet now. We'll do an analysis to see if the 240, if that 40 feet really makes a difference. Have there been any instances in the past of problems with that separation? The FAA has actually already been talking to the airport about working on MOS for that area. They're actually not saying no to that.
Okay. And a second question is, I noticed that alternative 2 was the preferred alternative, and that was for an extra 1,800 foot. The 2,400 feet, why did you decide that was not a preferred alternative?
The additional expense just to get the runway protection zone completely on airport property, it's going to be $5 to $8 million additional to do that. Plus, you're impacting the golf course by relocating Clubhouse Road.
So is the 1,800 feet going to get us where we want to go with regional airlines, with, the needs of fire bombers, things like that?
The 9,100 feet, which is what is recommended, was based on the existing aircraft. The existing design aircraft for Prescott is the Embraer 120, which Great Lakes utilizes right now. That aircraft needs the 9,100 feet because that is the design aircraft because it flies 500 operations a year. That's 500 takeoffs and landings. If an aircraft doesn't have that many, it is not considered critical to the airport. And that's just FAA. That's their guidance. So I understand that fire bombers are very important. The 9,100 feet will definitely help them. They have indicated to us they don't require any additional length, but it doesn't mean they're not going to take it and it's not going to help their operations.
Okay.
In addition, we looked at future airline service. What's going to be needed? Regional jets coming in, if that's going to be an option. The 9,100 feet will help them. They will have a few restrictions like Embraer has, or like Great Lakes has right now. They might not be able to take off fully loaded, but with the jet aircraft performance, it'll be very good. For an Embraer 170, which is the most likely aircraft within the 20-year period, as far as the size-wise, you need approximately 10,000 feet. But right now, that is not justified.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Jesse, you're our employee,
Yes.
and while I realize we have an agreement to get a consultant, my main concern as a elected official for the city is the security and the fire safety of the citizens of Prescott, understanding we live in the woods, watching most recently what's taking place over in California, having been through several fires here, including the Chetasky and the Indian fire. Understanding that some of the input that we've had is that there's been a restructure of the slurry bomber fleet. What's being proposed in the recommendation, does that accommodate my concerns with the new slurry bombers that, and, at some point, we've got to acknowledge that a load of slurry has some weight to it, and the runway needs to have a certain length.
Right.
Are we comfortable with what's being proposed?
Well, I think that they would still operate under a waiver like they are currently today. I don't see that being a threat, and our concerns are certainly aligned with yours. The U.S. Forest Service is a partner that we value, and we want to keep them here and make them happy. I do think that I should say, even outside of this airport master plan, we are still looking at other ways to lengthen the runway past what's recommended today based off of the commercial design aircraft. Just because it's put in the master plan does not mean that we can't pursue funding elsewhere and further lengthen the runway, and we are currently in pursuit of that.
Thank you for that answer. So if I'm hearing you correctly, in no way in the future does this limit our capability of lengthening the runway
No,
to accommodate what we may need 10 years from now?
no, absolutely not.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Good?
First of all, I want to thank all of you for the hard work you've done. I know I've attended many of the advisory council meetings and know that you've thoroughly vetted these alternatives. So I think we've reached probably the best option when you consider cost and capability. I think with the handling the distance requirements for the taxiways will give us the capability in the future to deal with most of the likely commuter jet options. Most of those are, I understand, like 50-passenger jets at this point. And if and when, far in the future, we need bigger capabilities, once we get all these taxiways corrected, then it's just a matter of the length of the airway, of the landing strips, and we would have that capability as we go northeast. Is that correct?
Yes.
So having the right balance of investment cost to the city and then potential capability, I think we've reached the best likely alternative. So I appreciate that. And from my understanding, that 1230 runway is primarily used for the helicopter operations. Isn't that correct?
And GA, like the GA population uses it. It just depends on the winds, but mostly it's not generally used for the airline. And then the tankers aren't allowed to
I
use
mean, I don't see
1230.
too many general aviation craft using that unless there's wind issues,
Right.
which causes my slice on, I think, the 14th fairway to be a problem with public safety, and we don't want to have those OV-1s ending up in the cockpit of those.
Right. Agreed.
Thank you.
So your time frame there, it looked like in the first quarter of next year. When can we expect some financials, some cost analysis on this so we know what we're dealing with?
Well, if we proceed on with where we are at the preferred ownership, if there are no objections to the preferred alternative, we will finalize those, and our plan is by the end of January to have the financial chapter finished up, because we do have to sit down or at least have a conversation with the FAA and ADOT to find out what they will participate in funding-wise, so we can figure out who's paying for what.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Public, anybody? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. Thanks for your presentation. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you very much.
I know, I couldn't remember Councilman
Short and sweet.
Okay, you guys, I'll see you at 1 o'clock.
Sounds great,
Thanks, Billy.
I will hear you at 1 o'clock and watch you. That's the great thing about, I'm actually watching what you guys put, it's all in delay. So, yeah, it's good. All right, see ya.
See ya.
Yeah.
What time have you got?
There's nothing pending, so.
Oh, I got time to go to lunch now.
Yeah, wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. We could actually, address the cardboard cutout.
I have one that I wear.
Right.
I was going to call in, but there was not an option to do that.
There wasn't a call-in option, no. We did have a great time.
Well, it sounded like, I listened to part of it.
We had a great time, and the format was just fantastic. It was great to have people come in, be able to, they're in person and
Yeah, I saw them.
talk in person. It's always great to talk, with people calling in, but you don't get to look at expressions on their faces and just generally participate with them in other ways other than voice participation.
Yeah, I have no problem. I just don't know.
Yeah, it is.
I can, oh, yeah. No, I agree.
All right.
That we still go round and round and round. Yeah. I'll put a call into Steve. what I can come up with.
a way we can get the stuff that doesn't.
So we'll just put the whole.
Did you look at Woodfield looking all like Christmas?
Yeah, we can download it. I think it already is on the
one
website. It
meeting
just
a
took
year.
out all of the other alternatives that we had recommended.
Angry.
But
Jesse,
I get that presentation.
don't trade fast.